Welcome everyone to Video Chess Training on YouTube. I'm International Master William Paschall, and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to continue a series I began a while ago on a post-mortem analysis of the Hyperaccelerated Dragon. We're going to have a kind of ongoing update on this opening system, how we're working for improving it for black in practice. So I recently played a game, and I've based this entire lecture kind of around that stem game. We're going to do a little bit of summary and then an in-depth analysis of the line in question. So white plays e4, c5 from black, knight f3, g6. This characteristic move makes it technically the hyper-accelerated dragon. The normal accelerated dragon, then move knight to c6 on move 2. So this gives white this option to play d4, c takes d4, queen takes d4. If black doesn't like these variations with queen takes d4, but he still wants to play this opening, he could technically go back and play bishop g7, a form of the modern defense, instead of taking on d4. But to get to the hyper-modern type of setup in the accelerated dragon that we're talking about, the hyper-accelerated dragon, we're playing c takes d4, queen takes d4, knight f6, and now a number of moves are possible for white. e5, bishop b5, knight c3, and the additional move queen a4. This is the move that we're featuring in the previous video and we're going to continue with here today. There are other moves that we will cover later on in the series, including e5, bishop b5, the inventive move by David Bronstein. And also, I should mention this move has been played in a few games, queen a4, which I don't think it really has a name or a lot of theory behind it, because basically I think this move will force a transposition into the line with knight to c3. Basically after knight to c6, I think white's best move is knight c3, and we'll transpose with d6 to the stem game. So we'll go back and correct the move order though, just so that you know how it normally goes down. Knight f6, and now knight to c3 is our main line. We analyzed this earlier in a part 1 video here on Video Chess Training, Hyperaccelerated Dragon, Postmortem Analysis. This is part 2 now. We're going to continue with a new stem game and a bunch of games we've kind of merged together here. So now knight to c6, knight c3, and knight to c6, queen a4, d6. Yeah, usually in chess you have more than one option, but in such a hyper-modern setup as this, where white is developed so actively, we don't have a lot of options. So black actually doesn't really have an alternative to the move d6. And after d6, the only move that really tests black is e5, when there is the possibility I mentioned in the first part of the video series, part 1, about black playing knight to g4. And that is an interesting line. We're not going to be talking about that today. We're focusing on d takes e5, and now knight takes e5. I also mentioned bishop to b5 there in the other video. So knight takes e5, and now at this point we have some options. Not too many, basically 3. First of all, I'm not sure I mentioned this in the first video, but black can play queen d4. And this is kind of a wimpy way to play. You're willing to trade the queens and go into an ending where you have a slightly worse structure. This is kind of the default way for black to play if he doesn't know the theory very deeply. After this, basically, I think that white is slightly better. Knight takes, queen takes a4, knight takes a4, and b takes c6. Black has potential with the bishop on the long diagonal, but the structure is good for white, and the position is fairly simplified. So it's possible black will hold this, and I can't say white has more than a slight advantage, but it's just generally not really a very ambitious or exciting way for black to play this particular line. However, I should mention something I discovered recently after queen d4, analyzing with the computer here. I never realized white actually has an alternative. He could play knight to c4. It might be something you want to just look out for. Knight to c4 is sort of threatening things like knight to b5. And black has to play very actively after this. So you must react with knight g4. And I think that black gets reasonable play after knight g4. So just to keep in mind that knight c4 is a move. Black isn't always trading the queens by force there. But this should be adequate for black to get enough counterplay after knight to g4. Just something to mention in passing. We don't have too much time in the video, so I can't go over every possible line. If you have any suggestions or questions, please contribute in the chat down below the video. Knight takes c5 now. We're mostly focusing on bishop d7, which is the established move, which is the move I talked about in some detail in video 1. But I should mention that bishop g7 is an interesting and quite often played alternative. This bishop g7, and it's interesting, basically a pawn sacrifice in most variations. So white can either play knight takes c6, b takes c6, queen takes c6, bishop to d7 and win a pawn like so. Or when black has some significant compensation, or white can play instead the more common move, bishop to b5, when black castles, usually sacrifices a pawn like this. Knight takes c6, b takes c6, bishop takes c6. When black has two options, which we should investigate in later videos a little more in depth, because I think this variation might be the most complex of all of them as far as most pieces on the board and a lot of possibilities. But black mostly has played rook b8, but I think it might be interesting to look at this other move, bishop d7, when in this kind of endgame, after bishop takes d7, even queen takes d7 is probably playable. Knight takes d7. Basically, black oftentimes will exchange on c3, bishop takes knight, and reach a structure where he has maybe pawn down, but with a very, very good structure and no weaknesses, and double isolated pawns for white on the c file. So, and the other one is, as I said, rook b8, which has been played quite a bit. So we'll take a look at that in a future video. I just wanted to mention in passing that this is a major alternative to what we're going to look at here. So bishop d7, and in the first video I talked about the possibility of both knight takes d7, only real move for white, both queen takes d7, the more developmental move, and the move that we're going to focus on in the video here, knight takes d7. So I always tended to lean toward playing queen takes d7, although I hadn't studied the theory that deeply in this particular variation until recently. But knight takes d7 has the virtue of opening up this diagonal, the h8, a1 diagonal for the black bishop. It also covers the black king on the a4, e8 diagonal, and may hit the white queen, which is a bit awkwardly placed on a4. So there's a lot going for knight takes d7, although it seems like anti-developmental. This is the move we're going to focus on today in this video. Queen takes d7, bishop b5, bishop g7, and this variation also playable for black. So again, we'll probably focus on future installments a little bit more on that. So knight takes d7, we enter the stem game, the beginning of the stem game I played. And this is a line I talked about in part 1 of the video. So I got to try to, a chance to try to actually use something I played in video 1, which was created about a month or so ago. Knight takes d7. Now, white has several moves here, but I think bishop b5 is the only critical one. Bishop e3, for example, is playable. We could look at that. I don't think that it puts very much direct pressure on black's position. So bishop e3, this is the alternative to bishop b5. Bishop g7, and then the only thing I can really think of for white here, I'm not sure this has ever really been played in very many games, but in this position, Rook D1 would be in a kind of creative way to play the position, when black would have a couple of different options. He could give up the bishop on c3, bishop takes c3 check, which is going to get a little bit similar to the game that we discussed today. It's a little scary. I mean, we like the structure, and we generally like it when we can play like an ending with, say, knight, a good knight against bishop, where we have a good structure. But when there's two bishops on the board, it becomes kind of dicey, kind of scary to play these sort of positions where you're giving up the bishop. But nevertheless, interesting and probably playable for black. The other possibility is castles, which seems a bit more stable. And then here, if white continues with bishop b5, we actually reach a position that's very, very similar to what we're going to go over today. Just that the bishop's on e3. A little early, it doesn't do that much on e3. In fact, it can be a liability because this pawn on b2 not protected. So bishop e3 not clearly a contribution in that line. Very interesting is the possibility I looked at of h4 for white, basically omitting the normal idea of castling. And this would be an independent possibility that hasn't really been played, but something worth trying for white. Now, I don't recommend black plays h5. If h5, g4 looks like h takes g, h5, and white has a very, very strong attack very quickly with the active pieces. So I don't recommend that. I think instead of playing h5, black could play knight to b6, hitting the white queen. And the white queen will probably centralize, queen e4. And then this is the key square that seems to be very important for black in this particular line. Possible only because our white square bishop has been exchanged, by the way. Queen c8. So many Grunfeld type of fianchetto positions. We have problems because our pieces are getting in the way, especially the bishop on c8. Oftentimes, you know, it just gets stuck. It blocks the other pieces in. So the nice thing about this variation for black with bishop d7 and knight takes d7, there is no bishop on c8 to like clog up black's position. So he basically gets to use all of the pieces, and there are no bad pieces. And the rooks and the queen are all coordinated. Notice the white king is still on e1. White has the two bishops, symbolic advantage. But I looked at this, and I think black's equal. For example, h5, and then queen f5, trading off this very dangerous queen, threatening to win a queen with bishop takes c3 check. And best is probably bishop d3. And this computer evaluation is basically equal, like queen takes e4, bishop takes e4. And again, the bishop on e3, running into problems, knight c4 now for black, costing white time. And I looked at a position that I think is about equal, bishop c1, rook d8, and then rook h3. It's possible white, this defends against bishop takes c3, also prepares to maybe double on the d file. It's possible white has a kind of tiny advantage here, but I don't think that black has any serious problems. So this is an independent variation with leaving the king in the center for white, and it's interesting and probably worth a try, but I don't think that it's really dangerous for black. So having said that, we're going to go back to our main line. So bishop to b5, no bishop e3, bishop stays on c1 where it guards b2, and white intends to castle kingside. So bishop e5, and I talked about this position last time in the first video, bishop g7, and here I kind of like analyzed mostly just bishop takes c6. Bishop takes c6, b takes c6, like this. Queen takes c6, and we talked about rook c8. When white has to be careful where to put the queen. If you put it on a4 or a6 or e4, black has rook takes c3, b takes c3, bishop takes c3 check, winning the rook. So white has to play queen f3. And I analyzed this, bishop takes c3, and this pawn sacrifice for black. We're down a pawn, but white has a bad structure, and I don't think he's going to checkmate black on the king side very easily with the bishop and queen. So we kind of stopped our analysis here in video 1, saying that, well, this looks pretty good, and white needs to improve. So if we go a little deeper, there are more problems in this position. So instead of exchanging on c6, I think white's best bet is not to exchange on c6, not to try to win a pawn, as did occur in a game I played on the internet very recently. So we played castles for white, and now black castles. We don't really have any better move here. And again, bishop takes c6, b takes c6. If white takes the pawn, we play rook c8 and bishop takes c3. And I think that structurally black has huge compensation for the sacrificed pawn. So White's best move turns out to be Rook D1. And this move has been played by no less grandmaster than Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, who's now one of the top 10 players in the world. At the time he played the move, it was back in 2005, battle between two very, very strong French juniors, Vachier-Lagrave and Romain Edouard. So that game went almost parallel to the game that I played on the internet this week. I played against a player whose online name is Shah1, and this was played on the website LeeChess.org. It was a blitz game, a very well played blitz game by both sides in the opening, just 5 minutes with a 3-second increment. I think both sides played close to, perfect play in the opening. Eventually I made some mistakes. So Rook D1, and now the question is, this pressure along the d file, the threat to win my pawn on c6, this is different from what I looked at, where there was an early capture on c6. So I had to think, and the question is, can we play without exchanging bishop takes knight on c3? I think this is really the most important question about this position. And the answer is probably yes, maybe best, but I'm not sure. Objectively, if you want to play for a win, I think you're going to have to try to find a way not to trade too many pieces here with black. So we will get to that in a minute. But the way the Vachier-Lagrave from 2005 game went was similar to my online game. I played bishop takes c3, and b takes c. And here, black could play queen to c8, but it's kind of passive. So I don't know, the jury's still out on that, but it feels very passive for black, not to connect the rooks. So queen c7, and now bishop f4, played very, very quickly by my opponent online, who, possibly prepared this variation based on watching my video on this idea earlier. So bishop f4, and now this gains not a tempo for white, but it simply forces me to make a weakening pawn move that I'd really rather not make, which is e5. And after bishop h6, we reach a position from the game Maxime Vachier-Lagrave versus Romain Edouard 2005. But in that game, Romain Edouard played the slightly less accurate rook on f to e8. And I think that it's a very natural move, but if you look at the position objectively, you see that my move, rook on f to d8, is a little bit better, because I recognized, not just the importance of protecting the knight on d7, but this open file here I'm highlighting with my cursor, it's really of essential importance, I think. An open file, mutually open file in the center of the board. So rather than rook e8, Vachier-Lagrave's opponent should have played rook on f to d8. And that's what happened in my game, rook on f to d8. So this is a new move, theoretical novelty played by me. According to Computer Engine, it's probably the best. Queen h4 now, also probably the best. Knight c5, probably the best. And then we reach the position where it's not clear what the best move is. White seems to have a slight, my opinion is that white has a slight advantage here. Less than half a pawn. It's a little unpleasant for black, but I do have a better structure which should compensate for the two bishops versus two knights in this pretty open position. I do have the capability of defending my g7 square from getting mated, which is the point of knight c5. We're kind of really in a situation where we have to play very exactly. So in this position there are three main moves. Queen f6, which is a move that actually happened later in the Maxime Lagrave game, but I don't think it does a whole lot. After queen f6, knight e6 defends. That was the whole point, and I'm not sure what white can really do in this position to make progress. He could play rook e1, basically like trying to win the pawn on e5, but the black has this very, very useful move, rook d6, which highlights the value of putting the rook on the d file. So the rook on d6 is very, very disruptive. It also allows me to like capture on c6 with a rook in a lot of lines, And the queen can remain on c7 to defend laterally. In the event of bishop c4, bishop takes e6. We can take with the pawn, for example. So there's just a lot of really like river guarding themes, and we're threatening to double on the d file. So rook d6 is really solid. So queen f6 doesn't do a whole lot. The move that is kind of dangerous is bishop g5. We're going here after knight c5, the game. Again, this is from Lee Chess. I was playing a player by the name of Shah1. Bishop g5, and this move looks more problematic for black. I feel that white may be better here. Again, rook d6, and then I think bishop e2. Bishop e2, which defends the rook on d1. Black starts to run out of really creative ideas, but there is this one, e4. And I don't like weakening my pawns, but bishop f4 is not really a threat here because of rook takes d1 check. And e4 sort of cuts off white's position in half, so I had the ability to play knight a4 and start attacking c3. So I looked at this variation, the blockading bishop e3 and knight a4. And here it looks like black, these knights are really working, and white doesn't have any really concrete threats. So it appears to me that black, seems to be doing okay for himself, getting outpost squares and maybe attacking c3. It looks like black's okay in this line, though it wasn't obvious during the blitz game. My opponent played instead bishop c4. Now, this was the position, bishop c4. This move also may well be the best. This is the text from the game, bishop c4. And I think I played correctly. Rook takes d1. I want to trade pieces. Rook takes d1. Try to reach an endgame where I'm okay. I have two knights against two bishops, but he has a bad structure. Maybe I can win one of those pawns. Rook d8, and then this position, white has two moves. He played rook e1, which is fine, avoiding exchanges and keeping the back rank guarded. He could also play rook d5. And after rook d5, white keeps a very small edge, like rook takes d5, bishop takes d5. For example, knight e6, threatening knight f4. G3, stopping knight f4. Queen d6, centralizing, and then queen c4. Queen very well placed on c4. Queen d7. And h4. In my opinion, this is probably best play, and it's slightly better for white, but I don't see any way he can force a win. I'm just a little passive, but still, I don't think this is a very easy position for white to win. So I'm going to conclude here with this is probably best play, and it does lead to a slight advantage to white. Therefore, we have to ask ourselves the question, should we try for something else? I mean, this is the best black can do. In the positions where we trade bishop on c3, should we play into this kind of position? I don't know. We're going to look at the alternative. In the actual game, after rook e1, I missed the key move. At this position, again, the river guarding rook move is huge. Rook d6, I think this just equalizes here. White doesn't seem to really have anything after rook to d6. I'm preparing like queen d7, rook d1, and it's very hard for white to organize any threats at all. So in the game, I made a mistake after rook e1. I played queen d7 in front of the rook. Yeah, I was getting into time pressure. It was a blitz game, and I was trying to play perfectly. But white found the very, very strong move f4, kind of opening the position, and now he's slightly better. And I have to be careful not to open it up too much. Obviously, dangerous to take on f4. He's got queen f6. He's probably winning immediately there. So I have to be prepared to meet queen f6. I play knight e6, guarding against, guarding the g6 square, for example. And then now here, f takes e5 is interesting. He didn't play that. He played queen f6. If f takes e5, I have knight e7. The two knights are really good blockaders. And I've got knight f5 in some positions, forking as queen and bishop. I'm down a pawn, but we're very coordinated, very compact. Knight e7, queen f2, hitting a7. b6, I analyze here, rook f1, and then knight f5 with the great blockading knights on e6 and f5. Bishop c1. It's a little better for white again, guys. I maybe have to play h5 here, I would assume, to establish my knight as permanent outpost on f5. but I'm not 100% certain that's necessarily forced, and we might have different moves. But the jury's out on this. It looks a little unpleasant for me. So the question is, can we do better? The actual game in question finished with queen f6, and I traded queens. Queen e7, queen takes e7, knight takes e7, f takes e5, and I was okay. I'm only slightly worse here. I think I played fine. Basically, knight to d5, and this was the text from the game. If I play rook c8 here, he has this annoying move, rook c8, rook e4. I saw this. This is very, very annoying. It just defends everything. So I think my move was fine, and then I just blundered. After rook d1, I don't know why, I was in time pressure, and I played the very, very lame move, knight to b6, which there's just no reason to do this. After knight b6, I trade pieces into a pawn down ending where I'm, just gasping for air. Clear advantage after knight b6. Rook takes d8, knight takes d8, bishop b3. Clear advantage for white. Maybe I could still hold a draw with perfect play, but it was very difficult. I ended up losing. In the actual game, though, I think there was nothing wrong with knight takes c3. After knight takes c3, forced move, I think. Rook takes d8. You go knight takes c3, rook takes d8, knight takes d8, bishop d2. I analyze knight e4, and bishop e3, b6. White has a slight advantage here. Black really doesn't have serious winning chances. Black is just trying to hold on, and I think he has good chances to hold on with the two knights. Are a little better than knight and bishop in general. They coordinate better than the knight and bishop, but white is still a little bit better here. So our conclusion is that this line with bishop takes c3, if we go back here, guys, bishop takes c3, is this good enough for black? Maybe not. I mean, we're not equalizing. It seems like we're always ending up just a little bit worse with like best play by both sides. So I wanted to find something better, and during the blitz game over the board, the move that screamed out to me was queen c8. And queen c8 is a bit passive, but we've got the c line for the queen. We're not really blocking in a lot of pieces. The rook on a8 a little bit. But the queen gets out of the way. The thing that bothered me over the board was the obvious move knight to d5 and the threat of bishop takes c6 and knight takes e7. And I started to see all sorts of ghosts here, honestly, guys. So I don't know what I was looking at, like crazy things. Rook e8 is obviously a main move. And this is the focus of our analysis now. We're going to turn our attention here. I had some strange fantasies in the blitz game about white playing like bishop to g5. But this b2 pawn is just hanging. So if you do that, I mean, bishop takes b2, rook b1, bishop f6. And, white is just a pawn down. So this is just pure seeing ghosts for me. Bishop g5 is not a threat. So this actually was played, and I found a game. I don't know the players really. I think I've heard of this player playing black. It's Hilby versus L. Debs. This is a game from 2015. Not sure where it was played. But Hilby versus L. Debs were following. I think the only game where this position's actually occurred. Rook e8. And I don't know, what alternatives does white have to knight to d5 here? Instead of knight to d5, I mean, not really that many moves. There's always the old bishop e3 that doesn't really do anything. After queen c8, there are other moves, like computer looks at things like the very subtle move like queen a3 might be worth investigating. Though it does seem weird, I mean, with the queen having this lateral mobility to put the queen on a3. So, again, bishop e3 leaves that b2 pawn unprotected. Always kind of questionable. So I like queen c8, and I think this is what we're going to play in the future. Although I haven't given up on bishop takes c3. Knight d5, and now rook e8 isn't forced. That is the move played in Hilby versus L. Debs. L. Debs is a 2500 player. He may be a GM. I didn't look it up, but it's definitely a strong IM or GM. Our alternative is interesting to rook e8. You could play knight to b6 here. And so let's take a look at this sideline, knight to b6. After knight b6, there's a forced sequence of tactics in the case of bishop takes c6. Let's see that. Bishop takes c6, knight takes a4, knight takes e7 check, king h8, knight takes c8. All this is forced. Only moves for both sides. B takes c. When the smoke clears, black's down a pawn, but he's got huge pressure on b2 and a hanging knight on c8. So white has to make a move. Apparently the best is knight to d6, and then I found a very funny way for this game to end, which is totally equal. I think the fitting end would be rook a b8, and now rook e1, so as knight takes b2 won't be like hitting the rook, and also threatening rook e7, king g8, defending f7, and then rook b1, knight c3, perpetual on the rook, rook a1, knight a4, rook b1. So we could have a repetition here, and checking this with the computer, it's basically valid. So black has compensation for the pawn. It's basically equal. So I think that line would be okay, but there is a problem for black in that after knight b6, there's just simply knight takes b6, and this is a little unpleasant for black. I analyzed this quite deeply too, because it's very simple for black. If it works, it would equalize very simply. But it's a little bit of a technical problem. After knight takes b6, a takes b6, we have this very bad pawn structure, b7 and b6. There is a big threat of knight d4 in some positions, knight d4 ideas. But white plays queen c4, and now the computer move is knight a7, which is pretty annoying for white, actually. So I found this long variation, queen takes c8, rook on f takes c8, bishop d3, and then the interesting move rook d8, which ties white down, making the bishop have to defend, and making the bishop immobilized because of the pin along the d file. c3 and then b5. Rook b1, knight c6, a3, stopping b4, keeping the pawn isolated, and black has just enough time to kind of fix his position and make sure his isolated pawn is protected. Knight e5, bishop e2, rook takes d1, bishop takes d1, rook d8, grabbing the file, bishop e2, and knight c4. And we're just in time to kind of keep everything together. White makes lift with g3, f5, both sides centralize their kings, and then a4, the tactical move that wins a pawn. So the question is this position after knight d2 check, bishop takes d2, rook takes d2, bishop takes b5, e5 for example, king e1, bishop h6, b4, e4. We have a position where black is a pawn down, but opposite color bishops and rooks. And it's not easy to say that white is necessarily winning here. Black's very active, although being a pawn down. White doesn't have yet two connected passed pawns, and I think there's a pretty reasonable threat here, rook c2, which is going to cause white problems. If black can move the king to the dark squares like e7 or f6, there will be the threat of rook a2 and bishop d2 check. So the computer plays rook d1, and after rook takes d1, king takes d1, I'm not really sure this is lost for black, because it's not two connected passed pawns, and it's not necessarily easy for white with a pawn on b7 to create by force two connected passed pawns. So this opposite color bishop ending might be tenable for black. I'm not sure if anybody wants to go there, but if you do, you have my blessing, and it's possible that black can hold a draw here. Going back to the actual game, though, we're going to play rook e8. This is El Debs' move. It looks like the right move. And now white, the jury is out as to what white should do. The pawn on b2 is under attack. You can't play the natural move bishop g5. So what did Hilby do? He did c3. I mean, totally makes sense, right? c3, a logical move. I mean, what else? Rook b1. It makes less sense than to tie your rook down than to play c3. So c3. And now a6, and here Hilby or anyone could play maybe like just to keep the bishop on the board with bishop e2 or something like that, but obviously critical looks like smashing the pawns. So bishop takes c6, b takes c6, and white tries to exploit this pawn structure here. He has the file, the d file, and black's pawns look a little worse. and he's neutralized the bishop on g7. So it looks like white's better, but I'm not so sure. In this critical position for the whole variation, knight to b4, forking the pawns, Debs has the timely knight e5. And when you put this on an engine, white doesn't seem to have an advantage. So it looks good for white visually with the two isolated pawns, but as in many cases of the Caro-Kann and Sicilian other openings, these C and A, isolated C and A pawns aren't always all that bad. Bishop f4 is the game continuation when Debs played a5, and later on didn't have any real issues. So this is good. Maybe at this point we can even suggest an alternative for black. Instead of playing a5, you could instead play the less committal knight c4 in this position. Knight c4, hitting b2, and white has nothing better than something like queen b3 and knight back to b6. Awkward position for both sides, but we're threatening to play a5 and stick a very powerful knight on d5. So I think this isn't clear at all. White could actually have problems with the b2 pawn, black using the b line. Black has the d5 square if he kicks the knight off of b4, maybe a5, a4, a3 type of counterplay. So it looks like black has enough counterplay to kind of hold the balance in this line. And that's where it stands now. I haven't seen any other information. If anyone else has any games you want to contribute to this theoretical discussion on this line of the Hyperaccelerated Dragon, feel free to comment below in the YouTube channel. But that's where it stands now. So a lot of stuff to look at, but I'm trying to kind of defend this line for black. Lots of good players play this variation, by the way. Anish Giri playing multiple games in this variation and doing okay in the past. So I think in fact, against Maxime Vacher-Lagrave, though they haven't actually played this exact continuation that we've analyzed today. Lots of interesting stuff, guys, and thanks for joining me here on my YouTube channel, International Master William Paschall, with Hyperaccelerated Dragon Post-Mortem Analysis Part 2. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like on the YouTube channel. Bye-bye.